Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 641 through 643, which will cover manga chapters 712 and 713. And Luffy's C Block battle begins while the Caesar drop-off team runs into a bunch of issues, including a shocking twist. So yeah, let's get into the synopsis. With the Caesar drop-off team making it to the green bit, but things are not as they seem as Violet reveals to Sanji that the world government has manipulated the news and Doflamingo has not lost his position as a Shichibukai or a king. Now Law has to face Doflamingo and Fujitora while Robin and Usopp have been captured by the Tontatta People. Alright, so differences. So as you probably noticed, these 3 episodes only cover 2 chapters worth of material. So that is unusual in a sense because most of the time the pacing has been, at least for a while, 1 chapter per episode, but now we are getting to the point where we are not actually adapting a full chapter per episode, and because of that, we get a lot of added material and some differences, and so yeah, there's quite a few in here. So the first is when Violet shows Sanji her memories of the morning in the anime, it just kind of flashes through a couple images. But in the manga, we actually get the full sequence of what happens that morning where the CP0 essentially explain the situation to the citizens of Dressrosa about what's going on with Doflamingo. And this scene will eventually get shown in its entirety in the following episode, in episode 642. But this was all just one sequence in the manga. It's not actually divided into 2 separate scenes. Another change is there's an extra scene added in the anime showing the C Block combatants walking into the battlefield, whereas in the manga, the way it starts off is that they're already standing there, and it's just this one 2-page spread where you get to see all of them kind of getting ready to battle. Another change is there's also an extra scene where Rebecca dreams about the toy soldier, but this isn't in the manga, and in fact, the relationship between Rebecca and the toy soldier is largely still unknown, with only slight hints that there is some sort of a relationship between the two. And they add an entirely new scene between them that when we don't really even understand their connection fully till Rebecca and Luffy kind of interact much later in the manga. So this whole section of building up Rebecca and the toy soldier is a little bit premature. I'm kind of on the fence as to like how I feel about this addition, because on the one hand, I think this kind of ruins the surprise that happens later on with Rebecca and Luffy. But then again, at the same time, it's not really that big of a twist or a surprise. But I do think it kind of takes away knowing that Rebecca is showing Rebecca in this sort of like more positive light, as opposed to like when she's properly introduced in the manga. So yeah, I guess kind of talking it out right at the moment, I think I'm a little bit more on the apprehensive side about this addition because it doesn't really add anything and it kind of takes away from the actual reveal of Rebecca's character later on. The next change is for the scene where Robin and Usopp get knocked out by the Tontatta People. In the manga, it's shown as a flashback after they've already been captured, but in the anime, it's told chronologically in real time. Separately, in the manga, Sanji does call Law to warn him, but the sequence of him running around with Violet while doing so at the beginning of episode 642 is all anime filler as well. So yeah, this scene is completely unnecessary, and it doesn't really do anything other than just pad out time and make it even longer than it necessarily needs to be. Another change is, of course, they add way more to the C Block round, just as they did with the B Block round of the tournament in episode 642. Although we do get the funny sequence of Luffy attempting to use his Gomu Gomu powers and remembering that it's too recognizable, so he calls out just a regular punch instead. And although this makes Luffy more careless and stupid than he's depicted in the manga, it's still funny to me. Like, I do enjoy this. I also love the joke that when he survives being smushed or survived something that he survived something due to his rubber powers, it's revealed that it's a sort of a compulsion for him to say that it's because he's rubber. Like, I thought that was a neat bit of character building, because up until now, anytime, whether it be canonically or through filler, anytime Luffy gets like smashed or he gets a bullet shot into him or something bounces off of him, he just yells out instinctively like, "'Cause I'm rubber." or like because I'm rubber, it doesn't work on me. And you'll see him do that like over and over and over. And I love how this joke inserted. He whispers it under his breath because it's like almost like a compulsion that he has to say that to people, which is pretty funny. And then lastly, the anime shows Luffy fighting against the brutal bull and also a bit of his fighting prowess via a short flashback. It also shows how he befriends him, which in the manga we don't see. And the next time we return to the Colosseum in the manga, he's already made friends with him and is riding him. This is, of course, referring to Luffy's uncanny ability to befriend wild animals with his haki between all the animals on Ruskaina as well as Duval's bull Motaboro. Like, we saw him do that. But yeah, I do think that this kind of... I like seeing this, but at the same time, in the manga, it was also pretty funny just to see him... Because it cuts away from when the combatants all enter the battlefield, and then it cuts away to show all the stuff that happens on the green bit with Law and Robin and Usopp. And then the next time we see Luffy is not till like the battle's already like pretty much midway through. And the first thing we see is Luffy riding on top of the brutal bull. And so you're wondering like what happened here? And obviously you can kind of fill in the blanks and just sort of surmise that yeah, Luffy probably befriended him just like he does with almost every other like giant wild animal. But yeah, I think this is, you can take it either way. I think it's nice to be able to see him do this, but also it kind of just again drags the pacing down of what is already an incredibly long and drawn out arc, even in the manga. Alright, so now that we've gotten through all the differences, or at least the major ones, there are a lot of smaller ones too that I didn't even mention. But yeah, let's get into the episodes as we pick right back up where the last episode ended with Sanji in a pinch about to be killed by Violet and her men. Violet is touched by Sanji's kindness and his ability to really see her true intentions, which is probably somewhat more impactful to someone who literally has the ability to see through people, that someone like Sanji could see through her own figurative mask, that she is in fact has a good heart and is somehow being coerced into working for Doflamingo. Violet, you can tell that she has been doing terrible things against her will, and even though all that, she was happy to see that someone was still able to see her humanity and good soul. I think when she's been doing so many terrible things that after a while she maybe probably started to believe that she was a bad person. But despite all the villainous behavior she displayed, Sanji was still able to see through all of that and all the good that she has. And it must have been a relief and a tiny bit of joy to hear that from somebody. She then turns on her own men and displays something I never would have imagined this type of devil fruit to be used in. As in an offensive manner, which leave it to Oda to be able to figure out an inventive way to do so in such an off-the-wall and unexpected way. Like, I can maybe see a scenario where it could be something like Cyclops, from X-Men, where she fires some sort of traditional projectile from her eyes, but Oda has her tears turn into these giant molten whales. Like, the whales alone is a wild concept, but then she has them turn into, like, molten iron, which is nuts. Like, who thinks of that? And Violet uses what's referred to as Hiero Lagrima, which I don't think I pronounced at all. And then the second part is Me Kujira, which is half Spanish and half Japanese. So Hiero Lagrima is Spanish for iron tears, Hiero meaning iron and Lagrima meaning tears. And then the Me Kujira is Japanese for eye whales, Me being eyes and Kujira meaning whale. The whales seemingly turn into iron, but then they just disappear. I always kind of wanted to see a bunch of these metal whales just kind of strewn about the warehouse or the whale house. Violet then shows Sanji through her ability that it's not Doflamingo walking into a trap, that it's the other way around. And I like that her ability, she can allow others to see, which is kind of cool. Back on the green bit, Robin and Usopp are knocked out and taken captive by the Tontatta people. And Robin is somehow sewn into the ground. And this scene, while presented as a whimsical, innocent scene, like the perviness of Oda and his editors are on full display yet again, as these guys are just like crawling all over Robin in very suggestive ways. And it's kind of weird. This scene always was weird to me. I'm not necessarily uncomfortable with it or anything. It's just weird. But anyways, Leo gets introduced here as sort of the main Tontatta, and the one who sewed Robin into the ground via his devil fruit, the Nui Nui no Mi, or the So fruit. And Nui means, or Nu is to sow or sow in Japanese, which again, another really creative devil fruit that definitely has its uses, but it will be interesting to see how it gets used offensively. I would say this is more along the lines of like maybe Hina's like Orioni no Mi, or her cage fruit. Like it's very good at suppressing and capturing people. I remember when I first read this, I thought maybe that Leo might be able to do something to somewhat counter Doflamingo's Ito Ito or string powers, but we'll see about that. Robin, being the calm and level-headed person she is, talks with the Tontatta with honesty, but the one thing we are about to learn about the Tontatta is that they are incredibly trusting and super gullible, as Robin just plainly states that she's not out to hurt them. And they're like, okay, and let her go. And Robin's reaction here is amazing, because this is one of the rare incredible moments where she actually gets sort of a comedic reaction, as she is stunned beyond belief that they believed her and how gullible they are. And I love that slowly we are getting to see a more genuine and comedic reaction from Robin. Like, I wish we can see more of her getting these sort of over the top reactions like the rest of the Straw Hats. I don't think we'll ever see her get like, the white eyes and the sharp shark teeth or anything like that, but it's great to see that Robin is slowly becoming more and more like the rest of the Straw Hats and getting these like over the top facial reactions. Because for the most part, even post time skip, up till now, Robin has pretty much still remained a very stoic person with very limited, facial reactions. So it's nice to see that she's starting to get more of these like crazy ones. Later, we see the Tontatta chief Gancho, who is also just as gullible and trusting, and he's played by Kenichi Ogata, whose voice should sound somewhat familiar, as he voices another prominent character in One Piece. He is actually the bald, Gandhi-looking Gorosei. He's also, coincidentally, like Rebecca and the toy soldier, is another veteran and main character of the series Detective Conan. Ogata plays Professor Agasa, the man who builds all of Conan's gadgets for him and looks after Haibara, or Rebecca's voice actress's character. And kind of crazy how they all lined up here. And now we just need Minami Takayama, who plays the titular character Conan, to voice a character in One Piece, and then we'd have that entire trifecta, because we already have Wakana Yamazaki, who plays Nojiko, and actually kind of served as Nami's sort of replacement voice actress while Akemi Okumura was on maternity leave. She is actually Ran. So yeah, we have like most of the main cast from Detective Conan already in One Piece, which is kind of funny. I mean, and obviously Yamaguchi Kappei, who plays Usopp, is Shinichi, and also, now that I think about it, Ikue Otani, who plays Chopper, is Mitsuhiko. So yeah, there's a lot of characters from Conan who show up in One Piece. Although technically, Minami Takayama does voice a character in One Piece, but it's like a really random character in a non-canon TV special that took place just after the Arlong Park arc, but I don't really count that one. Also, regarding Kenichi Ogawa, one other more recent character that people might be familiar with in regards to him is he voices Gran Torino from My Hero Academia, the old little short dude who can like fly around and who is Deku and All Might's old mentor. One other interesting fact about this scene is how they took Robin's Denden Mushi apart and removed its electrical components and returned it to its wild nature, which is something we have yet to see, and funnily enough, it looks relatively unharmed and seems to be doing really well. And I've mentioned this in the past, but the Denden Mushi are not slaves. It's a symbiotic relationship, according to Oda in an SBS answer. They get fed while humans get to use them as communication devices, and both parties are apparently very happy and consensual about it. And interestingly, the only time we've ever actually seen the Denden Mushi get fed was through the live action series, where we saw Garp feeding his Denden Mushi some lettuce on the ship. But it's nice to know that having all those things attached to them doesn't permanently disfigure them or anything, and they're still just as happy afterwards. However, just as Robin is trying to leave to report back to Law, the Tontatta people get aggressive, saying that she needs to leave a weapon as tribute, but with nothing on hand, they begin to try and strip her of her clothes and belongings. Just then, another Tontatta arrives to put a stop to this attack, saying that she is partners with a hero, the other big human. And when I first read this, I got excited thinking that Usopp has maybe brought back Sogeking. But sadly, that wasn't the case. But the lie he did tell is equally interesting, I think. However, in response to this, Robin having another slightly comedic face with this sort of hilarious, like, thin side eye, she thinks to herself, Usopp, what kind of lie did you tell them? This scene like cracked me up, especially in the anime. I think just the facial reaction and the voice acting really sell this joke. Back on the beach, both Sanji and Robin warn Law about the setup, and it becomes too late as both Fujitora and Doflamingo arrive on the beach, and this was insanely hype, but also incredibly tense, with Law having to go up against 2v1 versus a Shichibukai and an Admiral. And yeah, this scene, I remember thinking to myself, oh my god, this scene is going to be incredible. And it was. This interaction gets real very quickly as Law understands that a pirate, even if they're a Shichibukai and a king, couldn't have pulled off something like this. Fooling the entire world, utilizing the world government and the media is impossible unless they were a celestial dragon. Although not outrightly stated, it's all but confirmed, and we get the crazy reveal that Doflamingo is a celestial dragon, which, like, oh my god. This was an insane revelation at the time because, at least for me, it never even occurred to me that a celestial dragon could be people outside of those weird-looking fools that live on Marijois, with the exception being the Gorosei. It does kind of make sense when you look at just how flippant he is towards the Marines and the world government. It isn't necessarily just because he's a Shichibukai, but because he's a celestial dragon, he has sort of that added level of pompousness. And however, it does raise some questions why Doflamingo is a pirate and doesn't live up in Marijois, or why he doesn't even have more resources at his disposal with the power and influence that usually a celestial dragon commands. And I remember at this point I was thinking about how Doflamingo could potentially be like a celestial dragon that got bored of that lifestyle and then left, but at the same time, when you see him being like inconvenienced and kind of irritated at certain moments, you don't get the sense that this was entirely according to his plan. Like, he's a celestial dragon, like, you know, they have infinite power, and yet he doesn't seem to have that. This was something that really threw me for a loop, and in retrospect, I really should have been able to figure this out. But again, I'm not very good with theories or basic reading comprehension, apparently. But yeah, there is more to this story about what Doflamingo's sort of relationship to the celestial dragons and the world government really is. On the flip side, looking at Fujitora in this scene is also very interesting as we learn more and more about him as a person, and the more he speaks, the more I love Fujitora. Like, he is just an incredibly stand-up and fair guy. Like, how he gives Law the benefit of the doubt, and if he claims that the Straw Hats are serving under him, then it doesn't violate the rules of the Shichibukai and he wouldn't be able to pursue him. But if he claims that they are in fact in an alliance, then he has no choice but to go after him. But he will not move until that fact is made clear, which I gotta respect because pretty much everyone else would jump at the chance to take Law out, trying to find other justifications or just assuming the worst, or even just bypassing the law entirely. We also learn how he became the new admiral, and it wasn't through a promotion or anything like that. He wasn't even a Marine prior to the time skip. He was drafted via what was called the World Military Draft. And that seems insane to me that they were able to draft someone as powerful as Isho. Like, after the Paramount War at Marineford, the Marines probably lost a huge chunk of their military forces, necessitating a draft to refill their ranks, as well as to just power up beyond that, seeing how much more threatening like Blackbeard has become and also the rise of the worst generation. But yeah, this wasn't even voluntary, which is very interesting. Everything surrounding the military draft is interesting. Like, people like Isho were just kind of hanging around somewhere. Like, how did they obtain this sort of strength and training? You've got to imagine that he was some sort of a military soldier or a general for some other kingdom, similar to like how Dalton or Chaka or Pell were sort of these strong warriors to protect their kings, but on a crazier scale. However, if you think about it even further, because of how unilateral this seems to be, it could also be seen as another way the world government, uses this to keep all the other kingdoms in line by weakening their military power to prevent things like uprisings and secession. Also, the final bit of information regarding the world military draft is that we learn the code name of the other admiral that was selected to replace the second spot. His name is Ryokugyu, or Green Bull. Ryoku is a less common way of saying green. Usually is said this way when it's used as a prefix or a modifier or adjective to something like, for example, like Ryokucha is green tea, where Ryoku is green, cha is tea. In contrast, whereas if you were describing the color of something or talking about the color itself, the more common way to say it is midori. And then, of course, gyu is bull or cattle in general. And this is also interestingly the less common way of saying it, as the kanji is generally read as ushi, and you'll even see this with Luffy and Brutal Bill, as he will affectionately call him ushi. And I'll get into that a little bit later, or not later, but in the next episode, when we actually do see Luffy call Brutal Bill or Brutal Bull ushi. And I hear gyu used more when it is used, again, like an adjective, like gyuniku is cow meat or beef. And it was kind of funny to hear English speakers struggle with ryokugyu. Like back in the day, the first time it was mentioned, because it was really hard to say, and I think it's a hard name to say too. People resorted to calling him only by his English translated name, Green Bull, and you'll even still hear some people to this day only refer to him as Green Bull instead of Ryokugyu. Oh, and also another sort of bit of trivia, I guess you can say, is from a more recent SBS in volume 94, we actually learn how all these Marines get their sort of epithet and like code names. And it's through this vice admiral named Nazu Ketagari. So his first name is Nazu and his last name is Ketagari. So he's a vice admiral in the Marines, and his sole job is to come up with these names. And yeah, his name is actually a pun. And so Nazukeru, it means like to name something. And so Nazu Ketagari is like someone who really wants to name something. And so his whole name is literally, I want to name things. And so his sole job is to come up with these names. And I think in the English translation, they call him Namingheim. So like his first name is Ne, and then his last name is Mingheim. So when you say it really quickly together, it's Namingheim or naming him. It's kind of funny how that works out, but I thought that was pretty clever. The funny thing is too, like this character has never actually appeared in the manga or in the anime. There's just a sketch of him in the SBS, and he looks weird as hell with like these like ponytails and this long like rectangular face. Of course, going back to Ryokugyu, the name, of course, got many people theorizing what his devil fruit could be, and along myself. Anything was possible now that Fujitora has been shown to not have a Logia fruit like the original three, and I think due to his color being green, many people, including myself, our thoughts all went to some sort of a plant-based devil fruit power, and my original guess back in the day was a fruit called the Kusakusa no Mi, which kusa meaning grass or weeds. And I had imagined it'd be like a Logia fruit where he could turn himself into like plant life and grass and stuff like that. I won't reveal one way or the other what actually ended up coming to pass, since we did just learn what his devil fruit was just about a year or so ago. At least where we're at right now, which right now it's April of 2025. Anyways, getting back to the story with Fujitora now understanding Law's standing, he resolves to capture Law, and immediately does probably one of the most insane things anyone has done in One Piece, as he uses his gravity powers to call down a freaking meteor. Even Doflamingo is like, WTF, like what the heck is happening? And all three men deal with the meteor in their own ways, which is pretty cool. And we get one of the more iconic shots of the three of them standing on their little pillars of land, while everywhere else around them is a gigantic crater. And I absolutely love this shot and panel. It just shows off just how powerful all three of these guys are. And there's just something about them all standing in these little pillars while everything else is just destroyed around them. And lastly, to finish off these episodes, we see what Usopp did to be considered a hero to the Tontatta. And like it was foreshadowed all the way back during the Skypiea flashback, that the dwarves did exist as they were mentioned by Noland. But Oda took it one step further by going on to pay that one line off into this connection that Nolan, being the kind person he was, stood up and helped the Tontatta people 400 years ago during his adventures just as he helped the Shandians back then. Usopp, seeing the statue of Nolan, immediately puts together and impersonates Nolan's descendant. And I know I say this like every arc, but it's just wild to me how Oda keeps reintegrating elements and characters that you think were like one and done at the time and connects them back in fairly significant ways. Like when Nolan was introduced in the story, I thought he was a character that basically served his purpose in the arc that he was introduced in. And it never really thought much of it. But that one book, The Liar Nolan and the character of Mont Blanc Norland, or Mont Blanc Norland, man, that's a really hard name to say, has gone on to provide so many clues and callbacks that I had never even imagined. And this isn't even the last time Nolan and the story of Liar Nolan will be relevant either, because it continues to show up. It's a pretty big piece of history. And I think that's one thing that One Piece is so good at in terms of world building and make you feel like this is a real world, is that there's actual real history involved in the world that surrounds everything that's not necessarily related to our main characters, but just that there's this world outside of them that's going on, that has gone on, that's completely unrelated to them, but it somehow plays a significant role in their stories, which is really cool in my opinion. Like I love it when things like this happen. But of course, this lie has the unintended consequence of Usopp now basically being seen as the second coming of the hero on the eve of them preparing to fight back against Doflamingo, as we don't know why, but they are somehow being subjugated by Doflamingo. And the face that Usopp makes as they're all cheering Usoland is absolutely hilarious. And this is probably one of my favorite Usopp faces, where his eyes go wide and his lips become all pursed, and he's just like staring like, what have I done? And then Robin just sitting beside him, he's like, oh no. I love Usopp and Robin together. It's such a funny dynamic because you have probably the most silliest character with the most serious character, and they're just like playing off each other. It's such a fun dynamic. But yeah, despite all this, Law is now in a tough spot, having to somehow figure out a way to fend off his Shichibukai and the Marine Admiral while keeping their one piece of leverage in Caesar away from them, while all the Straw Hats are off dealing with their own situations, some more serious than others. But yeah, we'll have to wait till the next podcast to see how they get out of their predicaments. But yeah, hopefully you'll join for that. But yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates when I post new episodes, or see some pictures of my manga collection and my card collection too. But yeah, of course, like I always say, just listening to the podcast is enough support for me. But if you feel like doing a little bit of extra, you can check out my Buy Me a Coffee profile found on the website. But of course, it's not required. And as always, I want to thank you for taking the time out to listen to the podcast. Stay safe out there, no spoiler section, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!